My name is Alex Ryder. For as long as I can remember, I've been drawn to the edges of the map, the places whispered about in hushed tones, the forgotten corners of our world that most people actively avoid. While others find comfort in the familiar, I find a strange sort of solace in the unknown, a thrill in peeling back the layers of reality to glimpse what lies beneath. You could call me an explorer, an adventurer, or perhaps even a bit of a madman. I prefer the term wanderer. My journey into the realm of the bizarre began innocently enough. As a child growing up in a quiet suburban town in Ohio, my fascination was fueled by dusty books on local legends and grainy photographs of supposed paranormal activity, while my friends were playing baseball or glued to video games. I was poring over accounts of haunted houses and unexplained phenomena, my imagination running wild with the possibilities that lay just beyond the veil of normalcy. This youthful curiosity eventually blossomed into a full-blown obsession. The local ghost stories weren't enough anymore. I needed to see these places for myself, to feel the atmosphere, to experience firsthand the strangeness that these tales described. My first real expedition was a solo trip to an abandoned asylum just a few hours from my hometown. It was a dilapidated structure, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the overgrown landscape. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something indescribable that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't encounter any ghosts that night, at least not in the traditional sense, but the feeling of profound unease, the sense of being watched by unseen eyes, was more potent than any fictional haunting. That night solidified my path. I knew then that I couldn't go back to a normal life. The world held too many secrets, too many strange and unsettling places that needed to be explored. Over the years, my explorations became more ambitious, my destinations more remote and more disturbing. I've trekked through desolate deserts to witness inexplicable geological formations that defy conventional science. I've navigated dense, primordial jungles rumored to be home to creatures that shouldn't exist. I've descended into the suffocating darkness of ancient catacombs where the silence itself seemed to whisper forgotten horrors. With each journey, my understanding of the world, and perhaps even reality itself, became increasingly fractured. I started documenting my travels a few years ago, initially just for myself, as a way to keep track of the places I'd been and the things I'd seen. But as my experiences grew more bizarre, more unsettling, I felt a strange compulsion to share them. Maybe it was a desire to connect with others who might understand this strange pull towards the unknown. Maybe it was a warning, a way to show people the things that lurk in the shadows, the truths that are often best left undisturbed. Whatever the reason, I decided to create a platform, a place where I could share my stories, the tales from my explorations of the world's strangest locations. This brings me to you, the reader. What you are about to read are my personal accounts, unfiltered and unembellished. Some of these stories might sound unbelievable, even fantastical. You might be tempted to dismiss them as fabrications, the overactive imagination of a thrill seeker. I understand that skepticism. In fact, there were times when I questioned my own sanity, when the things I witnessed were so far removed from anything I thought possible that I wondered if I was losing my grip on reality. But I assure you, these stories are real. They are the products of my own two eyes, my own trembling hands, my own racing heart. They are the echoes of whispers in the dark, the lingering scent of something foul, the indelible images seared into my memory. Before I delve into the specifics of my most memorable expeditions, I think it's important for you to understand my methodology, my approach to exploring these strange locations. I'm not a paranormal investigator in the traditional sense. I don't carry around EMF readers or spirit boxes. My tools are simpler: a reliable backpack filled with essentials: food, water, first aid kit, navigation tools, and a high-quality camera and recording equipment to document everything I encounter. My approach is one of cautious observation. I spend time in these locations, sometimes days, sometimes even weeks, trying to understand their history, their atmosphere, the stories that cling to their walls and linger in their shadows. I talk to locals, if there are any, trying to glean any information, any rumors or legends that might shed light on the strangeness of the place. I research extensively beforehand, delving into historical records, local folklore, and even obscure online forums to gather as much information as possible. But ultimately, my explorations are driven by instinct, by a gut feeling that pulls me towards certain places, a sense that something significant, something out of the ordinary, resides there. It's a feeling that's hard to describe, a subtle vibration in the air, a prickling sensation on my skin that tells me I'm on the right track. Of course, this approach isn't without its risks. I've had close calls, moments where I genuinely feared for my life. I've encountered things that defy explanation, things that have left me shaken and questioning the very nature of existence. But the allure of the unknown, the insatiable curiosity that burns within me, always pulls me back. So, where do I begin? Which story should be the first one I share with you? The one that will set the tone for the strange and unsettling journey we are about to embark on. Perhaps I should start with the abandoned mining town in the Nevada desert, the one where the silence was so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me, and where the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. Or maybe I should recount my experience in the ancient forest in Romania, the one where the trees were twisted into grotesque shapes, and the air was thick with a sense of ancient malice. No, I think I'll start with the story that still keeps me awake at night, the one that truly made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. It's the story of the lighthouse on the isolated island off the coast of Maine, a place shrouded in mist and whispered legends, a place where I encountered something else. The island itself was small and desolate, a jagged outcrop of rock battered by the relentless waves of the Atlantic. The lighthouse stood sentinel at its highest point, a tall, white tower that had guided ships safely through the treacherous waters for over a century. But for the past few decades, it had been abandoned, deemed obsolete by modern navigational technology. The locals in the nearby fishing village spoke of it in hushed tones, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and superstition. They said the island was cursed, that strange things had happened there over the years, unexplained disappearances, eerie lights seen flickering in the tower long after it was decommissioned. Naturally, this only piqued my interest further. I chartered a small fishing boat to take me to the island, the grizzled captain reluctant to make the journey, muttering about bad luck and restless spirits. The sea was rough that day, the waves crashing against the hull as we made our way through the choppy waters. A thick fog hung over the island, obscuring it from view until we were almost upon it. As we drew closer, the imposing silhouette of the lighthouse emerged from the mist, its empty windows like dark sockets staring out at the turbulent sea. The captain dropped me off on the rocky shore, his face pale with apprehension. He promised to return in 3 days, his eyes darting nervously towards the looming lighthouse. As his boat disappeared back into the fog, I was left alone on the desolate island, the only sound the crashing of the waves and the mournful cry of distant seagulls. I made my way up the winding path to the lighthouse, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The fog swirled around me, creating an eerie atmosphere of isolation. The wooden door to the lighthouse was old and weathered, but surprisingly, it wasn't locked. With a deep breath, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior of the lighthouse was damp and musty, the air thick with the smell of salt and decay. Dust lay heavy on every surface, and cobwebs draped across the corners. The circular room at the base of the tower was empty except for a crumbling wooden staircase that spiraled upwards. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the fog-shrouded windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. I spent the first day exploring the lighthouse, documenting its layout and taking photographs. The living quarters on the lower levels were surprisingly well preserved, with old furniture still in place, covered in layers of dust. I found old logbooks detailing the lives of the former keepers, their daily routines, their observations of the sea. There were also some more personal entries, towards the end, that hinted at a growing sense of unease, mentions of strange noises and unsettling feelings of being watched. As I climbed the winding staircase to the upper levels, the air grew colder and the silence became more profound. The lantern room at the top of the tower was the most striking. The massive Fresnel lens, once the heart of the lighthouse, was still in place, its intricate glass panels covered in grime. Through the dirty windows, I could see the swirling fog and the churning sea below. It was a breathtaking view, but also a deeply isolating one. I spent the night in the old keeper's quarters, the silence broken only by the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the rocks below and the occasional creaking of the old building in the wind. I tried to sleep, but a sense of unease kept me restless. Every shadow seemed to dance in the periphery of my vision. Every creak and groan of the old structure sounded like footsteps in the empty halls. The next day, I decided to explore the island itself. It was small enough to traverse in a few hours. I found the ruins of an old boathouse, its timbers rotting and collapsing into the sea. Further inland, I discovered a small, overgrown cemetery with weathered headstones, the inscriptions barely legible. It was a somber place, filled with a sense of forgotten lives and lost souls. As I wandered along the rocky coastline, I noticed something unusual. Carved into the face of a large boulder just above the high tide line was a series of strange symbols. They weren't any language I recognized, a jumble of lines and circles that seemed almost organic. I took photographs of the symbols, my curiosity piqued. I had seen similar markings in other remote locations, ancient symbols that seemed to predate known human civilization. It was on my third and final day on the island that things started to get truly strange. The fog had lifted, replaced by a clear, sunny sky. I decided to spend the morning exploring the area around the lighthouse one last time. As I walked along the path leading to the tower, I noticed something lying on the ground, half hidden in the tall grass. It was a small, leather-bound book. It looked old, its pages yellowed and brittle. I picked it up carefully, brushing away the dirt and grime. The cover was blank, with no title or author. My heart pounded with anticipation as I opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten text, the ink faded but still legible. It appeared to be a journal, written by one of the lighthouse keepers. The early entries were mundane, detailing the weather, the ships that passed by, the daily routines of life on the isolated island. But as I read further, the tone of the journal began to shift. The keeper wrote of strange dreams, of unsettling noises in the night, of a growing feeling of dread. He described seeing shadows moving in the periphery of his vision, even when there was no light source to cast them. He wrote of hearing whispers on the wind, voices that seemed to call his name, but spoke in a language he didn't understand. He started to withdraw, becoming increasingly paranoid and isolated. The later entries were even more disturbing. The keeper wrote of seeing lights in the tower when it should have been dark, of feeling a presence, a malevolent entity that seemed to be watching him. He described vivid nightmares filled with grotesque figures and terrifying landscapes. His handwriting became erratic, his words filled with fear and desperation. The last entry in the journal was dated several decades ago, not long before the lighthouse was officially decommissioned. It was short and chilling. "It's here. I can feel it. It's inside the light." God help me. A cold wave of dread washed over me as I finished reading the journal. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The stories the locals told, the strange occurrences, the keeper's terrifying final words, it all seemed to fit together. There was something wrong with this lighthouse, something more than just an old, abandoned building. As I stood there, clutching the journal in my trembling hands, I heard a sound from the direction of the lighthouse. It was a faint, rhythmic clicking, like the sound of gears turning. But the lighthouse hadn't been operational for decades. There was no reason for the lens to be moving. I slowly turned towards the tower, my heart pounding in my chest. The lantern room at the top was clearly visible in the bright sunlight. And then I saw it. The massive Fresnel lens was rotating. Slowly, deliberately, it was turning, casting beams of light across the empty island. I froze, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. How was this possible? There was no power source connected to the lighthouse. No one else was on the island. The clicking sound grew louder, more insistent. And then I heard another sound, a low, guttural moan that seemed to emanate from the tower itself. It was a sound that sent a primal fear coursing through my veins, a sound that spoke of unimaginable horror. I started to back away slowly, my eyes fixed on the rotating lens. The moaning grew louder, closer. And then, in the reflection of one of the glass panels of the lens, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure was standing in the lantern room. It was tall and gaunt, its form indistinct in the flickering light. But I could see its eyes, two glowing red points that seemed to pierce through the glass, staring directly at me. I didn't wait to see any more. I turned and ran, scrambling down the path towards the shore as fast as my legs could carry me. The moaning followed me, echoing across the island. I could feel those red eyes burning into my back. I reached the shore and frantically scanned the horizon for the fishing boat. It was nowhere in sight. Panic began to set in. I was trapped on this cursed island with whatever was in that lighthouse. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm me, I saw the small boat appear through the mist, the grizzled captain looking even more pale than before. I waved my arms frantically, and he steered the boat towards the shore. I didn't say a word as I climbed aboard, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The captain didn't ask any questions, but I could see the fear in his eyes as he looked towards the lighthouse, its lens still slowly rotating, casting its eerie light across the water. We didn't stop until we reached the mainland. I never looked back at that island. I never wanted to see that lighthouse again. I still have the journal. I've shown it to experts, historians, linguists. No one can identify the symbols on the boulder or fully explain the strange occurrences in the lighthouse keeper's writings. To this day, I don't know what I saw in the lantern room that day. Was it a ghost? A demon? Something else entirely? Something beyond human comprehension? All I know is that the lighthouse on that isolated island holds a dark secret, a terrifying presence that continues to watch and wait. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls outside my window, I can still hear that faint, rhythmic clicking, and that low, guttural moan echoing in my ears. This was just one of my explorations, one of the many strange and unsettling encounters I've had in my wanderings across the globe, but it was the one that truly opened my eyes to the darkness that exists in the world, the things that lie hidden in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. Are you ready to hear more of my stories? Because I have many more to tell, tales from the edges of reality, from the places where the veil between worlds grows thin. And trust me, the lighthouse was just the beginning. The world is a far stranger and more terrifying place than most people can imagine. And I've seen things that will forever haunt my dreams. After the unsettling encounter at the lighthouse, I found myself drawn to places with a different kind of darkness. The vast emptiness of the sea and the isolated nature of the island had amplified the feeling of being utterly alone and vulnerable. For my next expedition, I sought a location steeped in history, a place where the weight of centuries pressed down on the present, a place where the darkness felt more communal. This led me to the ancient city of Prague, specifically to the labyrinthine network of tunnels that lie beneath its picturesque streets. Prague, with its Gothic architecture, its medieval bridges, and its air of timeless mystery, has always held a particular fascination for me. Beneath the surface beauty, there's a palpable sense of history, of secrets buried deep within the cobblestones, and nowhere is this more evident than in the city's underground tunnels. These tunnels have a long and complex history, dating back to the 12th century. Originally built as cellars and storage spaces, they eventually evolved into a vast network of passageways used for everything from transporting goods to providing shelter during times of conflict. Over the centuries, they've also become the subject of countless legends and rumors. Tales of secret societies, hidden treasures, and, of course, restless spirits abound. My interest in Prague's underground was sparked by an old, out-of-print book I stumbled upon in a dusty antique shop. It was a collection of local folklore, and one chapter was dedicated to the tunnels. The stories ranged from the mundane, like tales of smugglers using the tunnels to evade customs officials, to the truly bizarre, accounts of strange sounds, unexplained lights, and even encounters with shadowy figures that vanished into thin air. One particular story caught my attention. It spoke of a section of the tunnels beneath the old town square, a part that had been sealed off for centuries after a series of unexplained disappearances. According to the legend, the tunnels in this area were haunted by the spirits of those who had gotten lost within their maze, like depths, their whispers still echoing through the darkness. Despite the ominous nature of the tale, my curiosity was piqued. I spent weeks researching this specific section of the tunnels, poring over old maps and historical documents. I discovered that there were indeed records of a sealed off area beneath the old town square, dating back to the 18th century. The official reason given for the closure was structural instability, but the local whispers suggested a far more sinister cause. Armed with this information, I made my way to Prague. The city itself was everything I had imagined, a beautiful and captivating blend of old-world charm and modern vibrancy. But my focus was on what lay beneath. I made contact with a local historian, a somewhat eccentric old gentleman named Professor Jan Novak, who had dedicated his life to studying Prague's underground. He was initially hesitant to discuss the sealed, off tunnels beneath the old town square, his eyes clouding over with a hint of unease when I brought up the subject. However, after I explained my research and my genuine interest, he relented, sharing with me some of the local legends and even showing me some old maps that indicated the approximate location of the sealed area. Professor Novak warned me against trying to access these tunnels. He spoke of strange occurrences reported by workers who had ventured near the sealed-off sections in the past, sudden drops in temperature, the feeling of being watched, and, most disturbingly, the sound of faint whispers that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. Naturally, his warnings only strengthened my resolve. I knew I had to see these tunnels for myself. Gaining access to the sealed-off area proved to be a challenge. The entrances were long since bricked up, and the official records offered no clues as to their exact locations. However, Professor Novak did mention a network of older, interconnected tunnels that might provide a way in. These were less documented, more forgotten, and potentially more dangerous due to their age and instability. After several days of searching, exploring various access points to the known tunnel network, I finally found what I was looking for. It was a small, unassuming doorway hidden in the back of an old, abandoned storage cellar beneath a centuries-old building near the old town square. The door was heavy and rusted, but with some effort, I managed to pry it open, revealing a dark, narrow passage leading downwards. The air that wafted out of the opening was cold and damp, carrying with it the distinct smell of earth and something else, something ancient and stagnant. This had to be it. Equipping my headlamp and camera gear, I squeezed through the opening and into the darkness. The passage was low and claustrophobic, the rough, hewn stone walls damp to the touch. The only sound was the echo of my own breathing and the occasional drip of water. As I ventured deeper, the passage opened up into a wider tunnel. The air grew heavier, the silence more profound. The beam of my headlamp danced across the uneven floor and the arched ceiling, revealing the rough texture of the ancient stonework. I consulted the old maps Professor Novak had given me, trying to orient myself within the labyrinthine network. The maps were incomplete and often contradictory, but they gave me a general idea of the layout. The sealed-off section, according to the legends, lay somewhere to the west. For hours, I explored the tunnels, my headlamp cutting through the oppressive darkness. I passed through long, echoing corridors, vast underground chambers, and narrow, winding passages. The silence was broken only by the occasional scuttling sound, likely rats or other small creatures that called these tunnels home. As I ventured further west, I began to notice subtle changes in the atmosphere. The air grew colder, and I felt a strange prickling sensation on my skin, as if I were being watched. The silence also seemed to deepen, becoming almost expectant. And then I heard it. It was faint at first, a barely perceptible whisper on the edge of hearing. It sounded like multiple voices, murmuring just beyond the range of comprehension. I stopped and held my breath, straining to hear. The whispers grew slightly louder, a chorus of indistinct voices that seemed to come from all around me. I couldn't make out any specific words, but there was a definite sense of presence, of unseen entities just beyond the reach of my senses. A wave of unease washed over me. This was it. This had to be the sealed-off section. The whispers, the cold air, the feeling of being watched, it all matched the legends. I continued forward cautiously, my headlamp sweeping across the darkness. The tunnel I was in now was different from the others. The stonework was older, more crudely hewn. There were also signs of more recent attempts to block off the passage, piles of rubble, and loose bricks that looked like they had been hastily thrown together. I carefully navigated my way over the debris, the whispers growing steadily louder. They seemed to be swirling around me, a disembodied chorus that filled the darkness. And then I heard a single voice, clearer than the others, whisper my name. Alex! My blood ran cold. I froze in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no one else down here. How could a voice in the darkness know my name? I slowly turned, my headlamp beam shaking, trying to pierce the oppressive darkness. There was nothing there. Just the rough stone walls and the endless blackness. But the whispers continued, swirling around me like unseen currents of air. And then I heard my name again, this time closer, right behind me. Alex. I spun around, my hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight in my other hand. Still nothing. But the feeling of being watched, of being surrounded by unseen presences, was overwhelming. I decided to set up my recording equipment. Maybe I could capture the whispers, analyze them later. I placed the recorder on a nearby rock and activated it. As the recorder whirred to life, the whispers seemed to intensify. They were no longer faint murmurs, but a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once, a jumble of unintelligible sounds that filled the tunnel. And then, amidst the chaos, I heard a distinct phrase, spoken in a raspy, almost choked voice. Get out. The command was clear, unmistakable. It sent a shiver of fear down my spine. This was more than just the echoes of lost souls. There was something else down here, something that didn't want me there. I hesitated for a moment, my curiosity battling with a growing sense of dread. But the sheer intensity of the whispers, the palpable feeling of malevolence in the air, convinced me that it was time to leave. I grabbed my recording equipment and turned to retrace my steps. But as I did, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the beam of my headlamp, I saw a faint glow emanating from a passage that branched off from the main tunnel. It was a soft, ethereal light, unlike anything I had seen down here. My curiosity, the explorer's instinct that I couldn't ignore, took over. Despite the overwhelming sense of unease and the clear warning I had just received, I felt compelled to investigate the source of the light. I cautiously made my way down the side passage. The air grew colder still, and the whispers seemed to fade slightly, replaced by a low, humming sound that vibrated through the very stone beneath my feet. The passage opened up into a small, circular chamber, and in the center of the chamber, resting on a low stone pedestal, was the source of the light. It was an object unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was roughly spherical, about the size of a human skull, and it seemed to be made of some kind of translucent, crystalline material. The soft, ethereal light emanated from within, pulsing gently as if it were alive. As I stared at the object, mesmerized by its strange beauty, I noticed intricate carvings etched into its surface. They were similar to the symbols I had seen on the boulder at the lighthouse, a jumble of lines and circles that seemed to writhe and shift before my eyes. I felt an overwhelming urge to touch it, to feel its texture, to understand its nature. I took a step closer, my hand reaching out. But just as my fingers were about to make contact with the glowing sphere, I heard a sound that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a low, guttural growl, coming from the shadows at the far end of the chamber. My headlamp snapped towards the sound, and my blood ran cold at what I saw. Standing in the darkness, its formerly partially illuminated by the faint light of the sphere, was a figure. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs long and spindly. Its skin appeared to be stretched taut over bone, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent red light, just like the figure I had seen in the lighthouse. But this creature was different. It had long, sharp claws and a mouth filled with rows of needle-like teeth. It was hunched over, its body contorted in a way that seemed unnatural. The growling intensified, and the creature took a step towards me. I could feel its gaze burning into me, filled with pure, unadulterated hatred. Panic surged through me. I knew I had to get out of there. I turned and fled, scrambling back through the narrow passage, the guttural growls of the creature echoing behind me. The whispers in the main tunnel seemed to have returned, now laced with a sense of urgency, as if they were urging me to run faster. I didn't stop running until I reached the entrance to the tunnels, bursting out into the relative safety of the abandoned storage cellar. I slammed the heavy door shut behind me, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't dare to linger. I made my way back to my hotel, my mind reeling from what I had just experienced. I listened to the recordings I had made in the tunnels. The whispers were there, a constant murmur of unintelligible voices, and then the clear command, "Get out." But the most chilling part of the recording was the low, guttural growl, the sound of the creature in the chamber with the glowing sphere. It was a sound that would forever be etched into my memory. I never went back to those tunnels. I left Prague the next day, a sense of profound unease clinging to me. To this day, I don't know what that glowing sphere was, or what the creature guarding it might have been. Was it connected to the disappearances that led to the sealing off of that section of the tunnels centuries ago? Were the whispers the echoes of those lost souls, trapped forever in the darkness? The whispering tunnels of Prague remain one of the most unsettling locations I have ever explored. The feeling of being surrounded by unseen presences, the chilling command to leave, and the horrifying glimpse of the creature in the chamber with the glowing sphere, these are memories that continue to haunt my thoughts. The darkness beneath Prague holds secrets that are best left undisturbed. And sometimes, when I'm in a quiet place, I can still hear those faint whispers, a constant reminder of the things that lurk in the shadows, just beneath the surface of our seemingly normal world. Where should my wanderings take me next? Perhaps to a place where the darkness is not confined to underground tunnels, but stretches across vast, open landscapes. Perhaps to a place where the whispers are carried on the wind, and the creatures emerge not from the shadows, but from the very fabric of reality itself. I have many more stories to share, tales from the edges of the map, from the forgotten corners of our world. Are you ready to continue this journey into the strange and unsettling? Because the world is full of places that will test the limits of your belief and leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. And I've only just begun to scratch the surface. My journey through the world's strangest locations had taken its toll. The experiences in the lighthouse, the tunnels of Prague, and the silent glade in the petrified forest had chipped away at my sense of normalcy, leaving me with a lingering unease and a constant awareness of the hidden horrors that lurk beneath the surface of reality. Yet, the insatiable curiosity that drove me remained, pulling me towards one final, deeply unsettling destination, a place known only as Hollow Creek. Hollow Creek wasn't on any official maps. It wasn't listed in any tourist guides. It was a place spoken of only in hushed whispers, a ghost town shrouded in local legends and dismissed as mere folklore by most. But the stories I had unearthed about Hollow Creek were different. They weren't just tales of hauntings or strange occurrences. They spoke of a place that existed outside the normal flow of time and space, a village that seemed to shift and change, a place where the very fabric of reality felt thin and frayed. I first heard about Hollow Creek from an old, forgotten journal I found in the attic of a remote farmhouse in rural West Virginia. The journal belonged to a man named Silas Blackwood, a local historian who had vanished without a trace in the late 1920s. His journal detailed his obsessive research into local legends, and the final entries spoke of a place called Hollow Creek, a village hidden deep within the Appalachian Mountains, said to appear and disappear at will. According to Blackwood's journal, Hollow Creek wasn't simply abandoned, it was mutable. Witnesses claimed to have stumbled upon the village in different locations, sometimes miles apart. The layout of the village itself was said to change, buildings appearing and disappearing overnight, roads leading to nowhere, and the very air thick with a sense of wrongness. The journal also spoke of the inhabitants of Hollow Creek, or rather, the lack thereof. While the village appeared to be intact, with houses furnished and shops stocked, it was always eerily deserted. There were no signs of life, no footprints in the dust, no sounds of human activity, only a profound, unsettling silence. But the most disturbing entries in Blackwood's journal described something else, something beyond the strange spatial anomalies and the unsettling silence. He wrote of fleeting glimpses of figures in the windows of the houses, figures that seemed to flicker and fade like shadows. He spoke of hearing faint whispers on the wind, whispers that seemed to carry the voices of the long dead. And in his final, frantic entries, he wrote of a growing fear that Hollow Creek wasn't just a place that shifted in space, but also in time, and that something within the village was aware of his presence. Blackwood's disappearance only added to the mystery and the allure of Hollow Creek. I spent months piecing together other fragmented accounts, local rumors passed down through generations, and obscure online forum posts from people who claimed to have encountered the village. The stories were inconsistent, often contradictory, but they all shared a common thread of strangeness, a sense that Hollow Creek was a place where the rules of reality didn't quite apply. Armed with this patchwork of information, I set out to find Hollow Creek. The general consensus from the various accounts placed it somewhere deep within the rugged, heavily forested mountains of West Virginia. I spent weeks hiking through the dense wilderness, following vague directions and relying on my instincts. The isolation was profound, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the calls of birds. After days of fruitless searching, I began to doubt if Hollow Creek was anything more than a myth. The terrain was unforgiving, and the dense foliage made it easy to get disoriented. Just as I was about to give up, I stumbled upon a barely discernible trail, overgrown and almost completely hidden by the underbrush. There was a feeling about this trail, a subtle pull, that told me I was on the right track. The trail wound deeper into the forest, becoming increasingly narrow and overgrown. The trees here were ancient and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air grew heavy, and a strange, almost sweet odor hung in the air. And then, through the trees, I saw it. At first, it was just a glimpse, a cluster of weathered buildings nestled in a small clearing. But as I emerged from the trees, the sight before me took my breath away. It was a village, seemingly untouched by time. There were about a dozen buildings, mostly small, wooden houses, along with a general store, a church with a crooked steeple, and what looked like an old schoolhouse. A single dirt road ran through the center of the village, lined with overgrown weeds. This had to be Hollow Creek. I approached the village cautiously, my senses on high alert. The silence here was different from the silence of the petrified forest. It wasn't oppressive or malevolent, but it was profound, an absolute stillness that felt unnatural for a place that looked like it should be inhabited. I walked down the deserted dirt road, my footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. The houses looked like they had been abandoned in a hurry. Curtains hung crookedly in the windows, and in some I could see furniture covered in dust. The general store still had goods on its shelves, albeit covered in cobwebs and grime. It was as if the inhabitants had simply vanished, leaving everything behind. I tried the doors of several houses, but they were all locked. I peered through the windows, trying to get a better look inside. The interiors were surprisingly well preserved, with old, fashioned furniture, dusty photographs on the walls, and even half-finished meals on the tables. It was a snapshot of a life frozen in time. As I continued to explore the village, I noticed something strange. The layout didn't quite make sense. The buildings seemed to be positioned at odd angles, and the road seemed to curve in a way that felt illogical. There was a subtle sense of disorientation, as if the very geometry of the place was slightly off. I reached the church at the end of the road. Its wooden door was slightly ajar. Hesitantly, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior of the church was dimly lit by the dusty sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and decay. The pews were empty, covered in a thick layer of dust. On the altar, there was an old, leather-bound Bible, its pages yellowed and brittle. As I walked down the aisle, I noticed something carved into one of the wooden pews. It was the name Silas Blackwood. A chill ran down my spine. Had he been here? Had this village been the last place he ever saw? I stepped outside the church, the silence of the village pressing in on me. I decided to try and find a way into one of the houses. I walked around to the back of the general store and found a window that was slightly ajar. With some effort, I managed to pry it open and climb inside. The interior of the store was dark and dusty. Shelves lined the walls, filled with old, forgotten merchandise. Jars of preserved food, rusty tools, and faded fabrics sat gathering dust. It was like stepping back in time. As I moved deeper into the store, I heard a faint sound from the back room. It was a soft, shuffling noise, like someone moving around. My heart pounded in my chest. Could someone still be living here? Had the legends been wrong? I cautiously made my way towards the back room, my senses on high alert. The shuffling sound grew slightly louder. I reached the doorway and peered inside. The room was empty, but then I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the dusty floor, there were fresh footprints. They were small, child-sized footprints, and they looked like they had been made very recently. I backed away slowly, a feeling of dread washing over me. If the village was deserted, who had made those footprints? I quickly left the general store, my eyes scanning the empty street. The silence seemed to have deepened, becoming almost expectant. As I stood there, a subtle shift seemed to occur in the village. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to lengthen and distort. The crooked steeple of the church appeared to lean at a slightly different angle. It was a subtle change, but it was definitely there. The village was shifting. Suddenly, I saw a flicker of movement in the window of one of the houses across the street. It was a fleeting glimpse of a figure, a dark silhouette that seemed to vanish as quickly as it appeared. I stared at the window, my heart racing. Had I really seen something, or was it just my imagination playing tricks on me? Then I heard it. A faint whisper on the wind, a voice that seemed to come from all around me and nowhere at once. Leave. The whisper was soft, almost ethereal, but there was an undeniable sense of urgency to it. I started to feel a growing sense of unease, a feeling that I was not welcome here, that I had stumbled into a place that was not meant for the living. I decided it was time to leave Hollow Creek. I turned to head back the way I had come, but the trail I had followed into the village was gone. In its place was a dense wall of trees and underbrush. Panic began to set in. I was trapped. I tried to retrace my steps, but the layout of the village seemed to have changed. The road I had walked on was no longer there. The houses seemed to have moved, their positions subtly altered. I was lost in a village that shouldn't exist, a place where the very fabric of reality seemed to be unraveling. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like unseen voices. They were no longer just saying, "Leave." Now, I could almost make out words, fragments of sentences, whispers of sorrow and despair. And then I saw them. In the windows of the houses, figures began to appear. They were pale and gaunt, their features indistinct, like shadows in the fading light. They stood motionless, their empty eyes staring out at me. More figures appeared, until every window of every house was filled with their silent, watchful presence. They didn't move, they didn't speak, but their gaze was unnerving, filled with a profound sense of sadness and something else, something cold and malevolent. The whispering grew louder, becoming a chorus of mournful voices that seemed to claw at my sanity. I could feel their sorrow, their despair, their longing for something I couldn't understand. And then, the village began to shift again, more dramatically this time. The houses seemed to warp and distort, their walls bending and their roofs twisting at impossible angles. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble. The figures in the windows began to move, their pale faces contorting in silent screams. Their whispers became shrieks, echoing in the strange, shifting reality of Hollow Creek. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, a place where the laws of physics and reality had broken down. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to escape. I started to run, stumbling through the distorted streets of the village, the whispers and the silent screams of the figures chasing after me. The very air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. I ran blindly, desperate to find a way out of this cursed place, and then, through the swirling chaos, I saw it, a faint light in the distance, a break in the oppressive darkness. I ran towards the light, pushing through the warped and distorted buildings, the whispers and the screams growing fainter behind me. Finally, I stumbled out of the village and into the familiar darkness of the forest. The air here felt normal, the silence just the natural stillness of the wilderness. I didn't stop running until I was far away from Hollow Creek, until the strange, sweet odor in the air had faded and the feeling of being watched had subsided. I never went back to Hollow Creek. I tried to find it again on subsequent expeditions, but it was never in the same place. Sometimes I couldn't find it at all. It remained a fleeting, unsettling memory, a place that existed outside the boundaries of the normal world. To this day, I don't know what Hollow Creek was. Was it a place trapped in time? A tear in the fabric of reality? A collective hallucination? All I know is that it was the most terrifying place I have ever encountered, a village of shifting geometry, silent watchers, and endless whispers. It was a place that blurred the lines between reality and nightmare, a place that left me questioning the very nature of existence. My explorations of the world's strangest locations have shown me that there are things out there that defy explanation, places where the rules we take for granted simply don't apply. And sometimes, the most terrifying discoveries are not grand spectacles or monstrous entities, but subtle shifts in reality, whispers on the wind, and the silent, watchful eyes of something that should not be. These are my stories. These are the tales from the edges of the map, from the forgotten corners of our world. And while my wanderings may continue, the memory of Hollow Creek will forever serve as a chilling reminder of the strangeness that lies hidden just beyond the veil of our everyday lives. Be careful what you seek, for sometimes the world reveals its secrets in ways that will forever haunt your dreams. And sometimes the strangest locations are not just places on a map, but cracks in the very foundation of reality itself.